This happened in August of 2013. I was visiting Montreal for their driver's site weekend, which was basically like Pride, but took place the long weekend before the official Montreal Pride. My best friend at the time had met a guy at Toronto Pride a month earlier, and he invited both of us to come there, so my friend wouldn't be uncomfortable going to spend the weekend with someone he didn't know well. We arrived on Thursday, and the trip was going great. We went out the first night, walked the streets that were closed off to cars the next day, and our host made us a nice dinner, and then we went out again Friday night. Just a quick note before I get into what happened. I partied quite a bit with drugs at this time, and I also in the past had a tendency to lose my cell phone. So for a year prior, I stopped taking my cell phone whenever I went out. So that Friday night, we went out to a club, Parking, which sadly has since closed, and it was another fun night. The music was great and the tequila shots were incredibly cheap. I was dancing and moving all around the club, but would circle back and check in with my friends and our host. I would also run into people that I knew who were also visiting from Toronto and ended up taking some MDMA from one of them. Danced some more until I was completely soaked in sweat, so I went to the bathroom to wipe myself down and pee. When I got into the bathroom, there was someone leaving, but it looked like I was the only one in there. I went and used the stall because I have a hard time using the urinal, and once I came out, I was quite surprised to see a man in the corner of the washroom smiling at me. He looked in his mid-30s, on the shorter side, and a bit chubby. He was wearing a polo shirt and jeans, and had glasses, and I remember thinking when I saw, he reminded me of an accountant. Not sure why that thought popped in my head. I was pretty sure I didn't hear the door, but I couldn't be sure, so I just smiled back and said hello as I went to wash my hands.
Hello,
He responded.
are you having fun tonight?
I replied I was, and that the music was incredible, and was wiping myself down with paper towels and my shirt.
Do you want to do some coke with me?
He asked. Now, this was not the first time I'd been offered coke in a bathroom at a nightclub, and I'd done this in the past, and ended up having some good experiences, and met some interesting people, so I was already high and drunk, and not thinking much of it, so I said sure, I would love to, thanks.
I just live right near here. It's at my place if you don't mind coming over. We can do some lines and have a drink, and then walk back to the club,
He replied. Now, obviously looking back, I realize how very dumb my following actions were, and I can't imagine myself being so stupid and careless now. But without thinking about it, I agreed, and I left with him. The club allowed you to re-enter if you had a wristband. We chatted on the walk over to his place. He asked me where I was from, because I didn't seem like I was from Montreal, and what parties I had gone to, and how old I was, and my name. I asked his name, but he instead responded that we had arrived. The whole walk felt like 5 minutes, but I honestly hadn't been paying much attention to where we were walking. His apartment was in this building that had 3 floors, and his unit was on the 2nd floor. You had to climb this long, narrow metal staircase, and his door seemed to be in the middle of 2 other apartments on either side. He unlocked the door and let me in first, flicked on the lights, and told me to make myself comfortable. I was walking, and I noticed he had carpet, so I turned around to ask him if I should take my shoes off, when I noticed that he was locking the door from the inside with a key above the regular lock. And in that moment, I was overwhelmed with a feeling of dread like I had never felt before. The danger I had possibly put myself in another city, no phone, nobody knows where I am. And now seeing this person locking their door from the inside with a key. I just thought to myself, I'll pretend I didn't see that. I won't take off my shoes and politely hang out for a few minutes, then ask to head back. I also thought I could be having an extreme overreaction to what I saw because I was high, but as I looked around, everything inside me was just screaming, "You need to get out of here." I went and sat on the arm of the couch. He said I should take off my shoes and relax. I was getting a better look at him now in the lights of his apartment. He still looked plain and unassuming, but his eyes looked shifty, and he pulled down both the shades on the windows that were on each side of the door. I told him that I was okay, and I was eager to get back to dancing, so he said he would make us drinks, then we could go back. The apartment looked much bigger inside than it did from the street. It was an open layout with the living room beside the kitchen, and then a hallway in the middle with the closed doors painted black, and I could hear music coming from one of the doors. I asked him if someone else was there, as he came from the kitchen with a glass, and he replied no. As he handed me my glass, he looked me up and down. I wasn't wearing a shirt. He said, with this increasingly creepy smile spreading across his face,
"You have a very beautiful body, especially your chest. Would you mind if I took some before photos of you before we went back?"
Every alarm bell is going off in my head now, and all I can think about is Jeffrey Dahmer and all his Polaroids and what I'm going to do, because that was such a creepy thing to say, and all I can manage is a polite laugh as I take the drink and say sure.
"Excellent,"
he says. Then he tells me to take off my shoes, and he's gonna get the Coke and his camera, and to finish my drink. He walked down the hall, takes out his keys, and unlocks the second door, and opens the door enough to slip in and closes it behind him. The second that door was closed, I jumped up, ran over to the sink, and dumped my drink, put my shirt on, it had been tied around the belt loop of my shorts, and ran to the front door. I was able to turn and unlock the regular lock, but the door would not budge. I kept turning and pulling, but nothing. Then I heard from behind me.
"What are you doing?"
I turned around, and he was standing at the base of the hallway with one of those professional cameras slung around his neck and holding a square mirror with a pile of white powder on it. I thanked him for the drink, gesturing to my empty glass, but that it was getting late and I wanted to get back. But we could exchange numbers and maybe meet up tomorrow. His demeanor slightly changed. He was still smiling, but his tone, when he next spoke, sounded irritated. He asked me if I was nervous about taking the photos, and I should just wait for my drink to relax me, and I said no, that I wanted to go. This exchange of him telling me to stay and me saying no went back and forth for about a minute, when he suddenly glared at me, put down the mirror, pointed at the couch, and said,
"Sit down, now."
Not knowing what to do or how I was going to get out of this, I remembered that there were other units on each side of us, and it had to be around 2:30 in the morning at this point. So I just started screaming at the top of my lungs like a madman, banging on the door, the window, the wall.
"Shh, shut up, be quiet."
He snapped at me as he ran to the door. He quickly unlocked it and told me to get out and stepped aside. I bolted out that door and down the stairs, skipping the bottom steps, and hopped over the side of the railing. I looked up behind when I landed, and he wasn't there, but I heard a door slam and took off running down the street. I hadn't paid attention on the walk there, so I didn't know which way to walk, but I knew it was close. And luckily, I was able to wave down a passing taxi and take it back to the bar. When I got back to the bar, I found my friend in the same spot dancing. The whole incident must have been less than a half hour. I was too embarrassed about how stupid I had been, and being back in the club, I started to feel bad that I had just freaked out on this nice man, so I didn't say anything. But I stayed by his side until we left shortly after I got back. The entire thing felt quite surreal, and I remember the next day when I did tell my friend, kind of laughing it off and joking about getting murdered and trying to make light of it because it was so scary. And it wasn't until years later, after joining Reddit and this sub and reading other stories, that I started to think about that night more and more and realized how much potential danger I put myself in. So, strange man from the bathroom that lured me to his place and wanted to take before photos of me. Let's not meet ever again. Before I begin, I'm going to say that I'm a 19-year-old man and working a full-time job. I've since moved out of the place that this incident occurred in. What happened took place when I was about 6 years old. I lived in a decent neighborhood. We did have the occasional creepy person that would walk or bike by. We also had some apartment buildings where the people living there were heavy into drugs, but didn't bother anyone. They were nice people to talk to and frequently mentioned that they were into that stuff, but they never bothered me, so I didn't care. Now, enough with the background. The house I lived in at that point was a very decent size. My dad also built a garage, a huge garage. Now, this is where what happened. The garage was huge. It had enough space for 3 vehicles and rafters on the ceiling for storage of seasonal stuff, Halloween, Christmas, etc. This took place in December. I live in Atlantic Canada, and in Atlantic Canada, we get some pretty nasty snowstorms and blizzards. On a day in December, I was being a little kid in the snow, and my dad was working in the garage on one of his car projects. He had gotten thirsty and went in the house to get a drink. He came back out and asked if I had gone into the garage. I asked why, and he said there are footprints in the snow leading into the garage that he didn't think were his. I said no, and we both thought nothing of it. That evening, my dad and I went to bed early. My mom works late and came home late that night and saw some of my toys that were in the rafters stored away were on the garage floor. She thought nothing of it, moved them, and parked the vehicle in the garage, closed the garage door, went into the house, watched some TV, and went to bed. Now, my dad wakes up at 4 a.m. every morning to be at work for 5. The garage door was opened when my dad woke up, so naturally, he was angry. He wakes everyone up and goes out to the garage, comes back in, and is freaking out about a lot of very expensive equipment was missing. We called the cops. The outside lights were flicked on, and we saw those same mysterious footprints leading to the garage earlier, leading to the backyard, and into the forestry behind my house. The cops searched the garage, and my mom brought up the toys falling from the rafters. The cops asked to borrow a ladder and went up to check. They found a gun, a meat cleaver, 3 condoms, 2 of which were used, assuming he masturbated into them. I did not sleep for a week. I was terrified. They caught the guy 2 weeks later trying to sell all of my dad's equipment at a pawn shop. He confessed to everything. He said he broke into other houses on our street. He also stated he watched our house for a whole month to learn all of our routines so he wouldn't get caught. He had the weapons in case he did. He said he jerked off into the condoms when he saw my mom. He is currently serving a 15-year prison sentence. I don't want to know what would have happened if my mom, dad, or I had saw him. For some background info, at the time of this story, I was 13, and I'm also a female. It was around mid-March in Canada, so there was snow and slush everywhere. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, on to the story. I was walking to the store that's around a 5-minute walk from my house because I wanted chocolate and a drink. It was relatively warm that day, so I wore my spring coat and some sneakers, which now that I think about it, wasn't a very good idea considering the weather. As I walked to the store, I did my normal gaze around the place, just looking at everyone inside to see if I know anyone that's there or anything. Almost immediately, a balding man in a red tracksuit with white stripes, who looked to be in his early to mid-50s, caught my attention because he was looking at me already. While I was walking around, trying to decide what to get to drink, I felt like I was being watched, and I saw him about to leave the store, but still looking at me. I shook it off, thinking I was just being paranoid again. After he left, I quickly got what I wanted, paid for it, and left. When I got outside, I saw someone squatting next to the door with their hands in their pockets and their head down. After taking a second glance, I realized it was the guy from earlier. That raised a red flag for me, especially since he looked up partially before quickly putting his head back down when he saw me looking at him. After that, I started making my way home, but I felt like something was wrong because I've listened to enough true crime in my life to know that was a little fishy, to say the least. I looked over my shoulder, expecting to see nothing, but what I saw caught me off guard a little. The man was jogging after me and catching up quite quickly, so I made a break for it, bolting out of the parking lot as fast as I could, which, for the record, was really fast because I used to play forward in soccer. I made it out of the parking lot after almost slipping because of the slush, and I turned to see that he was still following me. I took no time to catch my breath before I started running like my life depended on it, which I thought it did. After another little bit of running, I turned around and saw him walking back into the parking lot as I made it to a bus stop that had multiple people at it. But I wasn't taking any chances, and I ran back home and told my mom, who slightly freaked out, but she was overall happy that I made it home safely. Who knows what would have happened if I never noticed him following me? I'm curious, but I'm glad I wasn't curious enough to stick around and find out what he wanted.